Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We've been looking at Iqbal's comparison of Immanuel Kant's and Ghazali's critique of reason. And in this context, Iqbal says that Kant's critique of pure reason revealed the limitations of human reason and reduced the whole work of the rationalist to a heap of ruins, and justly has been described as God's greatest gift to his country. We looked at these claims fairly in detail. Now, in this context, he makes a claim about Ghazali and the relationship of Ghazali's work to Kant's work. Not relationship, but the comparison. So Ghazali's philosophical skepticism, which, however, went a little too far, virtually did the same kind of work in the world of Islam. What do you mean by same kind of work? Showing the limitation of human reason and reducing the rationalist to a heap of ruins. Went a little too far, virtually did the same kind of work in the world of Islam in breaking the back of the proud but shallow rationalism which moved in the same direction as pre-Kantian rationalism in Germany. So all these claims are fair. All these claims are very misleading, to say the least. They are not correct. But that's not what our main focus is. But we'll try to understand Iqbal's thinking here. So first we should know what philosophical skepticism is, and whether Ghazali was a philosophical skeptic, and then how this skepticism is related to his demolition of rationalism. It's not clear here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so there are three interrelated questions in this regard. First is, what is philosophical skepticism? Okay, that's the first question. What is philosophical skepticism? Number two, was Ghazali a philosophical skeptic? That's the second question. Third question, and that's the most important question, even if Ghazali was a philosophical skeptic, and I don't think he was a philosophical skeptic, third and the most important question is, what Ghazali's so-called or purported philosophical skepticism has anything to do with his demolition of shallow rationalism. Obviously, Iqbal is making these claims and not giving no reason, and he doesn't have to, because that's just part of his argument. But his argument falls. His argument falls if any of these claims are untrue. So what is philosophical skepticism? Was Ghazali a philosophical skeptic? And what possible connection his philosophical skepticism, if he were a philosophical skeptic, has anything to do with his demolition of the so-called shallow rationalism he's talking about. Okay, so we need to look at these three questions, and probably we'll today look at what philosophical skepticism is, and that will answer the question of whether Ghazali was a philosophical skeptic as well. But then we would have to spend some time because Iqbal didn't actually say how he thinks that philosophical skepticism can demolish rationalism, because obviously Kant wasn't a philosophical skeptic, or at least as far as his demolition of rationalism is concerned, philosophical skepticism doesn't rank high in his argumentative strategy. So these are questions. These are very serious and complex questions. Let's read it again just to be clear, just to see what our argumentative strategy is. Ghazali's philosophical skepticism, which, however, went a little too far. Okay, he'll come back to that. Virtually did the same kind of work, that is the kind of work Immanuel Kant did in Germany in the 18th century or 18th century. Did the same kind of work in the world of Islam in breaking the back of that proud but shallow rationalism. Pride is shallow anyway. So proud but shallow rationalism which moved in the same direction as pre-Kantian rationalism in Germany. So these are all claims. So as we said, we'll look at what is philosophical skepticism first. Now, in order to look at philosophical skepticism and then whether Ghazali was philosophical skeptic or not, one thing, methodological viewpoint, a methodological question. I don't know whether we should raise it right now or it will be, but anyway, methodological question. So also a question about methodological question about history of ideas. And there are two strategies, because whenever we look at two thinkers, or two systems, two thinkers, or two or more than two thinkers, I'm just taking two thinkers, or two systems which are separated by space and time, There are two ways to look at or compare those systems and those thinkers. Either we can focus on similarities, or we can focus on differences. Either we can highlight similarities, or we can highlight differences. And depending on our intention, we will either see continuities between two systems or two thinkers, or discontinuities or breaks. So that depends on methodological strategy, the purpose of our investigation, etc. So the first methodological point whenever we are studying history of ideas is methodological choice. People make, whether they are going to focus on similarities or difference, and depending on your focuses, you can find, if you want to, because after all we are human beings, doesn't matter what our era is and what our views are, there are always going to be similarities. So depending on our methodological choice, we are either highlighting similarities or we can highlight differences. But by the same token, we can also have misleading assessment of the similarities and differences between two systems or two thinkers, because of the very fact that you can always find similarities even among most divergent and most unsimilar things. Similarly, you can always find differences among the most similar things. So depending on your purpose, depending on the context, depending on the purpose, this emphasis on similarities or differences, this methodological choice can be misleading or not, depends. So for example, there's a cup of juice, there's a cup of alcohol. You can focus on their similarities or their differences. There's a piece of goat meat and there's a piece of pork. You can focus on their similarities or differences. So even those two divergent things, according, for example, a Muslim, you can still find similarities. But those similarities, if you're looking at the prohibition of drinking alcohol, for example, or prohibition of eating pork meat, then highlighting similarities is probably misleading. It's not going to get you to the heart of the matter in that context. But in other contexts, so the same goes with the history of ideas. So this is a methodological choice, what you highlight, similarities or difference. There are always going to be similarities and difference between even Iman and Kufr. There are going to be similarities between two divergent ideologies, between Islam and capitalism, for example. But that doesn't mean that those similarities define the essence of the relative system, or in the context of your search, whether those emphasis on similarities is misleading or not. Because if your purpose is to highlight the essence of Islam or essence of capitalism and how they are different, then it would be misleading to highlight the similarities, generally speaking. But if your purpose is something else, it might be relevant. So it's very important in history of ideas to see what are we highlighting and why we are highlighting, because the context is important. Second, similar to this is the second point. I'm going through this because my discussion of philosophical skepticism would largely depend on these understanding of these methodological choices. So, just before I go to number two, just to give a more relevant example um, regarding these similarities and differences. So, Plato and Aristotle, they were studied in their own time in ancient world, in classical Roman world, but then they was understood in in the light of ancient episteme and ancient culture and ancient civilization, Roman and Greek civilization, and they meant one thing. Not totally different thing, but that meant one thing, and that was very different from medieval Christian and Islamic world when Plato, Aristotle was studied again. Especially Aristotle became part of Roman Catholic theological weaponry, especially with the predominance of Aquinas as the theological master par excellence in the medieval Catholic world. Aristotle became very important, and understanding of Aristotle, even as a Greek pagan thinker, was mediated through the Christian understanding of the things. So this reading of Aristotle, even when they knew that he was a pagan philosopher, was informed by their Christian worldview, their Christian understanding, their Christian reason, in a sense. And same could be said about the Muslim world, medieval Muslim world. Similarly, in the modern world nowadays and early modern world, people understood Aristotle in one way. So you will find Descartes, for example, Galileo, for example, critiquing Aristotle. Similarly, you find Luther, declaring that Aristotle is the greatest enemy of the Christians and the Christ. So what they were reacting to, what were they understanding? The Aristotle they were attacking wasn't a Greek Aristotle as understood in the Greek world. They were attacking the Aristotle which was part and parcel of the Christian theological and philosophical curriculum, as interpreted and as commented upon by Thomas Aquinas and his tradition. Largely, there were always other traditions. So although Descartes and Luther was criticizing Aristotle, but they was criticizing Aristotle which as interpreted in the medieval Christian world. And they were criticizing Aristotle from the viewpoint of a different Christian world, which was more Protestant world, Protestant understanding, which was mediated through Christianity, humanism, and nationalism, and all those things. That was very different from the understanding which Aquinas had, for example, of Aristotle. And even though Descartes came from the Catholic background, and obviously Luther was the founder of the Protestant movement, but they were both trained in the Catholic seminaries, Catholic universities. And they were reacting to that Catholic understanding of Aristotle in the light of their modernist project. One was religious, the other was philosophical, but they were modernist project nonetheless. And then you find, now when modernity is well established, people study Aristotle totally differently. They don't have that enmity toward Aristotle with Descartes and Luther had, and even the followers of Descartes today read Aristotle differently because they understand Aristotle according to their modern sensibilities, modern worldview, modern context, modern life world, if you want to use the phenomenological terminology. So what I'm trying to say is the methodological choices are important, but also the context is very important. So that leads us to the second context, to a large context, especially the dominant context. Dominant educational context, educational and cultural context, determines not deterministically, but determines nonetheless how we understand certain concepts, what meaning we give to them, and what things we highlight, and what similarities we highlight, what differences we highlight. So this context defines our understanding and meaning of words and concepts, and also our purposes to a larger extent. So that's the second point. This brings me to the final point of this session. After all, we won't be able to start philosophical skepticism, and what philosophical skepticism is, we would have to do it in the next session. But the third point is, which follows from the first 2 points, especially for is that as I said in the second point, context is important for determining the meaning of the concept. But meaning, as we have learned, we know, can be a referent, or what used to be called extension of a word, or it can be what we call, understanding or connotation of a concept. So for example, a word can have, so this is a reference in this understanding. So we might be using the same words with different understanding, but the same referent. It's possible that where referent is different as well as understanding. So people who are talking about morning star, before we know morning star and evening star, they didn't know, but they were referring to the same thing, although their understanding of that thing was different. For one set of people it was morning star, the other set of people it was evening star. So morning star doesn't determine on its own the reference, so to speak, but from this we can see, so for example, Christian and the Jews, they come first here, and then you have Christians and Muslims. They all believe, I've seen some debates, it seems like these Christian and Muslim, what they call them, apologists. Anyway, they don't remember or don't understand this difference. But anyway, if they could, that would conclude their debates. But there's a lot of debate among Christian, especially Christian Muslim. God, what do you call them? Apologists, or anyway, these people who debate that whether Muslims and Christians have the same, worship the same God. and you can, sometimes it includes Jews as well. But if we differentiate between reference and meaning in that sense, we can say that, yes and no. Because if they all believe in the God of Abraham, so it means their reference is the same. At least as far as their claim is. But on the other hand, their conception of God is different. So in that sense, they worship the same God, but their conception of God is different. The Jews have different conception of God. Christians have different conception of God. Muslims have a different conception of God. Obviously, Christian and Muslims and Jews have much more similarities in their conception of God, and Christian and Muslim and Christian Jews, their conceptions are much more different. But we can say that as far as reference is concerned, they are worshipping the same God, but their conception of the essence of the reality of that reference is different. So from this we go to a more substantial point that there are two ways we can do history of ideas. One way, which is still the predominant way within modernity, is where you say that, for example, when we call physics, Aristotle was doing physics, and Feynman was doing physics, and Newton was doing physics here. So we say that the referent of physics is the same. They are same sort of, but their understanding is different. So Aristotle was doing the same sort of stuff as Feynman and Newton were doing, even though Aristotle's understanding was poorer than Newton's of those same phenomena or those same. From this, we get the idea of history where we say physics has existed since the time of Aristotle and Plato. But our understanding of physics has improved. So in the second sense of the meaning. So we are talking about this, our references haven't changed, the reference of our concept. But our understanding has changed, and that's what progress is. And in that sense, even if we don't think it is linear, it goes through zigzag, but the knowledge is cumulative in the sense that it is, today we know more than Aristotle ever knew about physics, or Galileo ever knew about physics, or even Newton ever knew about physics, because we are doing the same thing, but we are adding up to understanding of that thing, and that leads to the progress, and that's the progressive grand narrative version of history. So in this we focus on referent, the sameness of referent, but the difference in meaning and understanding, and we emphasize similarities to say that referents are the same, but then focus on differences in terms of understanding it. That leads to our modernist conception of history of ideas, where people are doing the same thing, but their understanding about that thing is increasing. In a similar way, as if Muslim had said that Jews had a conception of God which was lacking, but they're talking about same God in as far as reference. And then Christian had conception of God which has something improvement on Jews, but also some added deficiencies as compared to Jews. So we have the example of Jews and Christian and Islam. We have a conception of God which is superior to all two, but we were talking about the same God. So our understanding of God has improved cumulatively. So that would be a Whiggish grand narrative version of the history of religion as from the viewpoint of Islam, because it comes the last. So in that sense, for example, people talk about Ibn Khaldun, for example, inventing sociology because he was studying society, I guess. So Durkheim and Weber are also studying society. So it means that Ibn Khaldun's project and his objective study and Durkheim's objective study and Weber's objective study is same. So that's why we can call all these endeavors as sociology. And since we think that Ibn Khaldun was the first person to study society systematically, we can say that he was the founder of sociology. And similarly, from the same viewpoint, you can say that, Aristotle was studying economics as well. And Thomas Aquinas did too, and Adam Smith did. But Adam Smith made much more advances in that sense. So he is, comparable to Newton or whatever. What Newton did to physics, he did to economics. But Aristotle, Aquinas, and Adam Smith all were studying the same phenomenon. And they were involved in the same discipline, same project. And which led to, progress, learning from each other, cumulative learning, etc., etc. So this is one understanding of history. It emphasizes similarities, it emphasizes differences, but it sees overall continuity in human thought across history, across civilization, across different cultures, different eras, etc., etc. As compared to that, you have another conception of history which sees physics done by Aristotle not only different from the point of view of understanding, but also point of view of reference. And in a sense, we assume here, just to be a bit simplistic, that our understanding actually determines our reference. So if a Christian says that no, even Abraham God, even though it is Abraham God's, our claim is Jews and Christians and Muslims, or especially Muslims, worshipping different God in both senses, because meaning or understanding actually determine references. So your meaning, what your conception is going to determine what is the referent. And referent is not independent from meaning in that sense. So according to this conception, even though people might call it physics, what Aristotle was doing and what Newton was doing, even though both are called physics, they are totally different things. Conception as well as a referent. And according to, so similarly what Ibn Khaldun was doing, even if you want to call it sociology or what Durkheim is doing, they're totally different things, because your conception determines your referent. Similarly for economics. And this second version of history, actually, where it doesn't see these long continuities, it doesn't deny continuities, it doesn't see linear or even zigzag cumulative progress as such, but it emphasizes breaks and gulf between different worldviews and different civilizations. Especially it sees radical break between modernity and its discipline and what came before. So this is the second conception. And just to be very simple, simplistic, and add up at this point, because we're going to wrap up the point, because we are going to go back to this again and again. We can say that the difference between Muslim modernism, like Iqbal and Reconstruction, and I'm saying Iqbal and Reconstruction because, in his poetry is not, at least not fully Muslim modernist, but Iqbal is obviously a great thinker, but other Muslim modernists, they basically believe in the first version of history, where they see continuities among civilization, especially among modernity and Islam. On the other hand, our my own orthodox revolutionary Islamic perspective is that we sort of focus on the second version of history. We see radical break between modernity and Islam. So that's the basic gulf. So that's why when Muslim modernists compare Ghazali to Descartes, for example, philosophical skepticism, he says similarities. But when I see it as the discontinuities. Similarly, when Iqbal compares Ghazali and Kant, he sees similarities. When I see it, I see discontinuities, dissimilarities, oppositions, breaks. And it's not just because of the my influence from French tradition of philosophical tradition of philosophy of science, but inspired that. Okay, I'll stop here, and then we'll continue, inshallah, in the next session with what is philosophical skepticism. Thank you.